This is the Rush Discuss, where the discuss is Rush. Welcome again to the Rush Discuss. We are battling out some really famous instrumentals today. YYZ and Leave That Thing Alone. Now, even if you are not someone who has listened to much of Rush, you've probably heard YYZ at some point in your life.
Or heard the title, or you know about it.
Yeah, this is, as you'll hear talked about in the discussion we have with both Jimmy and Adam and Steve, you know, it's brought up that YYZ is just kind of like the pinnacle of instrumentals just to the general public. Because, I mean, this was one that was used in Guitar Hero as well. I know that years ago, back before Julianne and I even were considering each other in any sort of romantic way, we were just friends as teenagers. And she knew that I was into Rush, and
I have no idea what you're about to say.
you brought up that you knew YYZ from Guitar Hero.
Vaguely remember.
And like you were trying to make small talk or something, like showing that we had some point of connection with that, because you're like, yeah, it's a fun song in Guitar Hero. And then I said something like, well, it's not even like one of my favorite songs. I just
Of course you did. Because that's what you would say now. Be like, well, I mean, yeah, that's why I was here. That's so funny. I do not remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, so YYZ is, I mean, that's something that has, I mean, it's from Moving Pictures. It's from the album that everybody knows. It's out there in the public eye. And then Leave That Thing Alone, I think, is criminally underrated.
I wonder, you know, like, the general public probably doesn't even know it exists.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you wouldn't know this exists unless you started digging a little deeper into Rush. But before we get any farther, let's go ahead and listen to the intros of these, because then we can get into the discussions that we had with the bassists and with our drummer. But this will at least give you a little bit of an idea of what is being talked about. If you've never listened to these songs before, highly recommend you stop listening to us right now, go and listen to these songs in their entirety, and then come back, because you'll be able to understand what is being brought up better. And these two tracks in particular are ones that it makes more sense to do this with, because like with the other ones, yes, we always want you to listen to the songs before and then listen to them after. But if you don't listen to it before, you can still get the stuff that we're talking about and then listen afterwards and have a great experience. But there's so much that is picked apart, and that we want to just have you kind of on the same playing field with this, that it's going to be doing yourself a big favor to just, if you never listened to these, go and listen to both of these before and then come back and keep listening. But we'll wet your whistle with the intros with both of these. So here's the intro to YYZ. What a way to start.
All right, now for the other one, Leave That Thing Alone. All right.
It's very different songs, but YYZ is the only Morse code that I know.
That's true.
Because the start of that song with Neil just playing on that tiny little symbol that has a real name that I don't know, is actually the Morse code for YYZ, and YYZ is the Toronto airport code.
Well, the whole intro is the Morse code.
Yeah, but I'm saying that it starts off just with the symbol and then goes
and then
to
they continue it.
but
I thought you were saying it was just
no. The
So,
whole
like,
intro,
the entire
yeah, the
intro
whole
is
intro
the-
is
the Morse code,
YYZ
yeah.
in Morse code.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I tried learning Morse code for like that long
Same.
and then stopped.
Remember when I wanted to learn Morse code so that we could talk to each other in like quiet settings, like if we were in church or something, and I could like tap on your leg, and I just spent like one day.
I even
trying
downloaded
to
an
learn.
app and tried to do it, and I got as far as A, which I don't remember, but I will always remember YYZ.
Anyways, moving forward from that little side note.
But yeah, that's quick trivia on YYZ there. But yeah, before we get too far into our discussion of these, let's turn the time over to first the bassists, Jimmy and Adam, once again, those guys, and we'll let you hear what they had to say because they had some really, really cool insights with the bass on those, and they really set the stage for what Steve will talk about from a drummer's perspective. So here is Jimmy and Adam. All right, so Adam, we've got YYZ and Leave That Thing Alone. You want to just dive in on it?
Yeah, I'm going to start with YYZ for our Canadian audience. They're, it's got to be one of the most legendary instrumentals ever made, and by a rock band. Bar none.
Yeah.
I mean, who else? What other song like that, an instrumental, have you ever heard audiences singing to? They sing, right? But it's inspired countless people to pick up any instruments of their choice because they're all at the top of their game. And but in this song in particular, and then also Leave That Thing Alone, they do something that they always do so well. I think Jimmy kind of touched on it, but they kind of, as far as the song form goes, they unravel and then they wrap it back up at the end. So they'll go like A, B, C, D section, and they go, D, C, B, A, and bring back in all those elements toward the end. So like after the bass and drums kind of go at each other with those solos, you have Alex's big, beautiful, soaring guitar solo. Mm-hmm. You get back to the main theme, then you go back to the B theme, the ba-da-da-da, So it's this great way to like create this, like, I don't know, when you're listening to it, you're like, I know where they got that. That was earlier, So it's fun. It makes it a fun listen, but they're without that song, God, how many people would never have picked up an instrument?
Oh, for
Really.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Myself included. I mean, that was right. It was the next track right after Red Barchetta on Exit Stage Left. So, no.
It's like the rock and roll like geek anthem, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like all those.
And it was kind of. It was also
proud of it.
Yeah, and I think Les Claypool even is quoted talking about this, but like that song. And still, when I was in high school, Jimmy, you probably had it too, but like it was like the benchmark for like if you're talking about your bass playing skills to other people. It's like, well, I could play fucking 46 and 2 by Tool. Like, well, I can play YYZ.
To flex.
Yeah.
It's always like Geddy Lee and Cliff Burton.
Yeah. Big brouhaha over that. And then Leave That Thing Alone has a very similar structure, but this song to me is actually a little bit more special. Like No Love Lost for YYZ. It's amazing. But this is like when Jimmy was talking about Dancy. Like this is I mean, if I could curse really quickly, this is like the one Rush groove that kind of fucks. It's like because I don't know, it's the bass groove that goes throughout the whole song. You got that cool little the cool keyboard patch that runs and everything, but it follows that same path of kind of unraveling and re-raveling like for the end and everything, but it's some of my favorite like instrumental guitar work from Alex on this song, just because it's his patented chorus soaring solo tone, and then just the ferocity of one of rock's best rhythm sections going at it together. So that's, if I had to pick one out of the two, if I'm going to choose one to put on when I go get in the car here, it's going to be Leave That Thing Alone every time. Because, and also like, it's one of my favorite songs to play. So,
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I can say about it, but those are two of my favorites. And that's why I jumped on them so quickly.
Yeah, that's
for real.
definitely with you on trying to play Leave That Thing Alone. It's just when you think of bass lines that just have everything you're looking for in a bass part. You've got the slides and just like the assertive nature of the bass being like, no, I'm in charge right now. It's just tons of cool moments in that one.
And then when you think back to like the record it came off of, Counterparts, like that was their big triumphant return to being a loud, heavy rock band. And coming off of that more smoother sound of Roll the Bones, like you hear this song, it's like I'm here, dude. and it's that big dirty jazz bass tone that has just stuck around since then, and that was one of the first songs of that era that really pulled me into wanting to own a jazz bass.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom, your bass knowledge, and definitely any people who still don't have an idea of what the bass can do, re-listen to these songs, listen to really, really try to focus on what the bass is doing. I know it's sometimes hard to hear in some other bands what's going on in the bass, but Rush, it's pretty easy to hear what's going on. It's mixed pretty well, especially these tracks. You can hear the bass, but spend some time really tuning up your ears and listening, because you're in for a treat for sure. But thank you guys once again, and we look forward to crossing paths down the line. You guys have been great.
Yeah, thanks you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Always awesome to have those guys with us. And down the line, I really hope that we can get them on again to break down more songs from the bass perspective.
Definitely.
But now, before we get into it, I want to go right into Steve and my interview. Because like I brought up in the intro from last episode with my interview with Steve, Julianne wasn't able to make it on there. And so she actually hasn't seen what Steve and I have talked about yet. So this will be the first time for her as well. But like I said before, the full hour conversation that Steve and I had on these two songs is on his YouTube channel. So go check him out, Junk Drummer TV at YouTube. And I didn't want to shortchange that conversation. And so I pulled a couple parts that are relevant, that are really great. But if you want the full conversation, you'll need to go over to his channel and check that out. But so here are a couple excerpts from my and Steve's conversation.
Okay, so let's start with Leave That Thing Alone, and we'll let YYZ be the main event. Excuse me. Leave That Thing Alone is a fantastic instrumental, and it has maybe the best Doctor Who melody that's ever been recorded that wasn't the Doctor Who melody. That B section sounds like Doctor Who to me. It does. It starts with that, kind of faux funk. It almost sounds like it was recorded on a Stratocaster, but I'm almost for certain that's not true. What you see in Leave That Thing Alone is something that Neil does better than any drummer. Is he does a concept that is as old as Johann Sebastian Bach, and that is theme and variation. When that A section comes back, I think that A section happens 3 times, or the B section, the Doctor Who part. Yeah. The Doctor Who part happens 3 or 4 times. Every time it happens, he's adding to it. The first B section, the first Doctor Who section is kind of more straight ahead. The second time he does the Doctor Who section, it's more of a tom thing, and he adds a lot of electronic triggers, and it may even be on electronic, but he did a lot of had small trigger pads on his acoustic set, and that tom treble, always called tom grooves, treble grooves. That treble groove that he plays on the second Doctor Who section is so melodic, something that drummers, I think, forget, and a lot of people that aren't drummers don't think about, is drums can be just as melodic, even though we are just making noise. We are noise organizers, right? And, we don't really, except unless you're Danny Carey, tune to a pitch, right? We just tune to toms till they sound good. And then hopefully it sets well in the mix. And if it doesn't, retune. But you can be so melodic. If you've ever heard the jazz tune, the drums also waltzes, right? The drum also waltzes by Max Roach. That's a melodic drum solo. Well, that section in the second Doctor Who section is just so, it's a hook. That drum part is a hook. People forget that, you think, oh, what's a hook? A guitar player plays the hook. No, man, the drums can too. And this song, and I want to talk about with theme and variation, each time he goes through each one of those sections, I think there's 4 or 5 sections if you also include that faux jazz part. Every time that part comes back around, he's adding to it. There's more hi-hat openings the second time, or there's more bass drum notes the second time. So I think that those are the subconscious things that we like, that even if you're not a musician and you don't know the nuts and bolts of what's going on, I think those are the things that we like. We like that. It's almost like a subliminal trick that we're playing on the listener. And Neil does it to perfection on Leave That Thing Alone. I forgot, because, man, I wore this record out in 1993, man. because again, it was like new Rush because I'd already like digested everything else.
Oh yeah.
And new Rush and it, and then what's the song that's right after that? I've been listening to it. Oh man, I'm going to mess this up here. The song right after "Leave That Thing Alone" is an amazing record as well. "Cold Fire," maybe is that what it is?
I think
maybe that's it.
Yeah.
But that whole record is just so great. But "Leave That Thing Alone," I think, is a masterpiece. It is a clinic on, and I think we talked about this on our other segment with Jim Brennan.
Yeah, Jim Brennan.
Bennon.
Jim
Benner. We were close. We were talking about, what I think about with Neil is he's the greatest composer of drums. And if you listen to the last episode with me on it, you would have already heard this whole spiel. He's the Mozart. He's the Franz Liszt of drums. He orchestrates the drums better than any drum set player ever. And I think I've kind of got a reputation on my channel as someone who rails against unnecessarily overly complicated progressive rock music. Mm-hmm. Like, prog has now reached a level of almost, we were talking about this offline. It's almost like robot singularity music. Yeah. It's so complicated and so over the top and so show-offy that composition gets lost and melody is lost and harmony is lost. Rush is the greatest progressive rock band ever, in my opinion. And I love a lot of other progressive rock music. I love Yes. I like the very first Dream Theater record. Well, Images and Words. There's some other ones I can't think of right now. But Rush is the pinnacle of it because they are a prog band. But if you know anything about them, man, they like Cream. They like Led Zeppelin. They're a rock band. They're a rock band that's just really good at their instrument, right? And Leave That Thing Alone is just a great example of theme and variation. Go listen to that and be real mindful of how his drum parts change. And there's such a good lesson in there. If you're like, I'm a drum teacher in my real life, so I'm always trying to find knowledge. I want to find how to get better and, level up, if you will. And there's so much in that song that if you could integrate it into your playing, you will definitely level up. That's what I think about Leave That Thing Alone. I think it's just a masterpiece. And and I was thinking about this too. Any of their instrumentals besides YYZ and La Via Strangiato are like prisoners to those songs. Mm-hmm. Because they're never going to get over as big as YYZ and La Via Strangiato, right? Those are the pinnacle of Rush instrumentals, so they get left behind. They get lost in the shuffle, right? Mm-hmm. Leave That Thing Alone, man. I would much rather at this point, because YYZ's so played out, I'd love to put on, Rock 108 or whatever, and hear Leave That Thing Alone instead of YYZ. I think a lot of classic rock songs need to be retired for a little while. Sure.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? Like, like Led Zeppelin, you hear like the same 8 Led Zeppelin songs. Let's retire those and let's hear the crunge once on the radio. You know what I mean? Like, as much as I love Tom Sawyer, let's not do Tom Sawyer anymore. Let's hear By Tour and the Snow Dog once in a while on like classic rock radio. Yeah. So that's what I think about how Leave That Thing Alone is not ever going to get its just due, because YYZ is just this monolith that is always, every Rush instrumental was going to have to compete against that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think what makes Leave That Thing Alone, at least to me, so much more interesting than YYZ is because the melodies are so simple, but they get passed around. Like, who's in charge of this simple melody? And then, like you brought up, the theme and the variations, just these subtle changes that you keep listening, and even though nothing melodically is changing all that much, you're like, there's something different, and I can't put my finger on it. And then it just, by the time that it finishes, you're like, wait, that's it? Like, we're done now?
and you brought, that's a really good point. Like that A section, which is just that one chord kind of jam, That's the Geddy Lee section.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Alex is kind of playing the bass part. You know, he's playing just that whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Geddy is driving the melody there, and then it switches to the Doctor Who part, and then Alex, you know, then you see Geddy become the bass player again, and then Alex is that you know, the melody, the heart of that melody right there. And they switch back and forth like that. And it's so interesting. It's such thoughtful, and I'm going to say this word a lot in this podcast. It's such thoughtful composition. You know, you can tell that Rush, more than any other like progressive rock band, made sure that at the bottom line of what they were doing, it was still a good song.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't just doing something because it's hard or difficult and trying to get on the cover of their respective instruments magazines.
Mm-hmm.
You can sing that Doctor Who part. You sing that all day. And like what you said, like, you know, the simpleness of it, it's beautiful. I've listened to that song since you contacted with me. I've listened to it 25 times, and it's just all those parts is just wonderful. And to get real nerdy, just from the production standpoint, it's so clear. The bass drum is just banging. You know, that snare drum. It's the best Neil Peart snare drum sound. I think it's the pinnacle of that, you know, if that is indeed the Radio King that he recorded with on, like, I'm pretty sure if I've got a buddy that works for Rush and he could tell me for sure that, you know, every Rush track, I'm pretty sure, comment section, go ahead, tell me I'm an idiot, was a Slingerland Radio King snare drum. And if that's the one, like if you think about, that's the same snare drum that's on, and this will just maybe transition us from YYZ to Leave That Thing Alone. Oh man, if you could get a snare drum sound like that, you got to pay that engineer a lot of money. You got to make sure he comes back for the next record if you can get that sound. So now, like if we want to go to YYZ is Neil at his most Neilist.
Yeah.
It's peak Neil. Everything that you want when you think of like drum god, cover of Modern Drummer magazine, probably the man who has sold more drum sets outside of Ringo Starr and John Bonham. It's Neil at his most Neilist, right? It's just, man, I'm just not, I'm relevant enough to break down Leave That Thing Alone. But I don't know, like, how am I supposed to break down this iconic instrumental, right?
Yeah.
It's YYZ. Like the answer should be like, do you like YYZ? And the answer should be like, yeah, it's YYZ. You know what I mean? It's YYZ. But it's everything like that. That has more of your, when you think of like Neil at his like roundhouse drum fills and there's some theme and variation in that. Because there's theme and variation in every Neil track. But that one, when you think about those iconic drum fills, I'm going to get technical real quick. The drum fill, one of the things that he does that I preach to my students that a lot of drummers don't do is that when they do a drum fill, we think drum fill, crash at the end. But let's go back and listen to those drum fills. He's interspersing crashes in the middle of his drum fill. So like, you know, he uses, and it's another like classical idea, resolution points. So like, you know, like maybe the resolution point, Beato, is going to be like the crash on the E of 3 and then a crash on the 1. So that's not exactly what's going on in that song, but like, you know, 1 unit, 2 unit, right? You don't see a lot of drummers do that. It's a way to spice your drum fills up. It's so, yeah, now I'm getting in drum teacher mode. Sorry. It's easy to, like, when you go into your drum fills, you think drum fill, exclamation point with the crash symbol. But one of the things that he did so wonderfully is intersperse splashes and, splashes a lot of times in his drum fills. And there's a lot of that going on in YYZ. You know, it starts in 5/4, right? The first thing I think is in 5/4, which is that supposed to be Morse code for?
Yeah, that's for YYZ because that's the Toronto airport.
Okay. Dude, they're just the most Canadian band ever. I love Canadians. Canadians can drink. Have you ever drank with Canadians?
No, but
They're superhuman.
I imagine that
it's superhuman.
with all the cold up there.
It's superhuman, dude. It's crazy. But yeah, so it's so Canadian because Canadians are so just love Canada so much. If you have any Canadian friends, they're just Captain Canada is what Rush should be. I mean, dude, they did the theme song to Hockey Night in America. Well, Neil did, right?
Yeah.
Like, what other drummer would like? Could you imagine a drummer like doing the theme song for like Monday Night Football?
No.
Maybe Dave
It's-
Grohl. They might get Dave Grohl to
Maybe.
do it. Maybe. Right? Maybe Travis Barker, possibly. But YYZ, starts out 5/4. Those snare drum fills that go with the bass part,
Mhm.
very rudimental. There's flams and accents in there. It's that track is if you wanted to like have the essence of what Neil was at that time. So we're like 81, right? They've recorded 4 or 5 records up to that point. If you watch that documentary, they all said that Moving Pictures was the pinnacle. They had reached the pinnacle. Like everything else was almost like a dress rehearsal for this record that put them in the zeitgeist and solidified them there forever, ever. Like until this world's done, people are going to listen to Rush, right? They're never going to go away. It's impossible. It can't. I've been teaching for 23 years, so I've probably taught through like 2.5 generations, and every generation of kids that I've taught are still coming in with Rush t-shirts on, are still coming in and want to know how to play those drum fills in YYZ. YYZ is just so iconic. I've used that word a lot too. It's as iconic as a Stevie Ray Vaughan guitar. When you see SRV's guitar, you think, oh, that's SRV. When you think about those drum parts, it's almost like a code between drummers. Like, hey man, can you play YYZ? It's that, right? And I only can because I can read music really well, so I can read it through. I can play it. I've done a Rush cover and I just read it through because it's just too much. I ain't got time to sit down and learn all that stuff by ear. You know what I mean? One of the things he does that I like when I listen to it again, it's like, oh, there's a thing that I've stolen for the last 25 years, where like he'll do like a. Oh boy, we're going to get in there. Do like 4 30-second notes off of the and brow, right? Not do it as a double stroke, but do it as a single. There's so much stuff in there that if we drummers ever had to pay like copyright on drum parts, we'd all be broke, son. Like there's so much stuff in YYZ that every drummer something else about it. They're the most iconic ride cymbal part. Boy, we're going to go nerdy. All you non-musicians, I apologize. But the 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a 1, that ride cymbal part, right? That ride pattern comes around a lot in the Rush oeuvre. You will hear that very iconic 1 and a 2 and 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a 1 and a 2 and E and 4 and a, yeah, that's the pattern, right? If you can learn that pattern, you've learned about 10, 12 sections of Rush songs, maybe more even. That's a calling card, and you'll hear people do it. You'll hear people do like, oh, there's the Neil ride bell pattern, because he never does it on the hi-hat. It's always on the ride cymbal. That's just so much iconic stuff that, like, Neil has been able to allow us lesser mortals steal from him and make us better because we got decent on our instrument enough to like steal his stuff. That's a big thing that I think of when I think of YYZ.
So big thanks to Steve for that. Really great insights. Yet again, go watch the full video because it is awesome. He just has so many cool things that other tangents he goes off on, and really deep diving into to why Rush is so unique, not just in their abilities, because yes, their abilities are great, but why it is that they will stick around forever.
Yeah, that was really really cool to watch that interview. I haven't even watched the whole thing either, so I'm gonna have to go. Been a little busy.
Yeah.
But anyway, I definitely enjoyed listening to Yell talk about that, and to be able to hear what the bassist said as well, and the different perspectives between those two instrumentalists, and making this decision pretty difficult, actually.
Yeah.
Where do we start? Like,
Oh boy. Well,
well, I was just thinking, like, going into this decision, I don't want to just choose one like, oh, it's obviously this one, because, like, I don't want to just be like, well, YYZ because it's so iconic. Like, what I'm trying to say is, if we do end up choosing YYZ, I don't want it to be because it's YYZ, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we want to separate from just all the stuff that's put onto it and just strip it away to what is this song in a vacuum.
Yeah, exactly. And not just, well, it's popular, so I'm choosing that one. Because
Yeah.
there's a reason it's popular.
Yeah, but that goes against everything that we're trying to do with this podcast.
Yeah, I just wanted to preface it, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm just reinforcing that.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people, if we were to pick Leave That Thing Alone, a lot of people would be like, oh, well, still would pick YYZ just because it's such, I mean, it's the YYZ. Instrumental, and it's YYZ. But, you know, at the end of the day, this is going to be a very extremely subjective choice that we come to in this moment.
That's why you have to choose your own.
Yeah. And because what we really want to try to do with this is break away from this idea that music is somehow like sports, where you can have clear winners and losers, and you can be like, nuanced. Well, this person was the best at this.
Right. You can't measure it really.
Because like was brought up in the drum interview when I was talking with Jim and Steve, we talked about that idea about, you know, what are you going to pick as the defining characteristic that makes this person better than everybody else?
Exactly.
It's like, well, okay, you can't say that Neil Peart was the best drummer of all time, because that means that he has to be the best in all styles. And he is not the best jazz drummer. Mm-hmm. And he's not the best metal drummer. He was the best drummer for Rush.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that you can say that he was the best at, as far as when you're comparing to other drummers. But I mean, I think also you can say, like what Steve brought up, is that he was the best for composing for drums. He really set a standard there of using the drums in a more melodic way and bring new depth to what you can do with the drums. But even then, he also mentioned someone else who brings more of a compositional thing to drums in other styles. And so it's like, even within being the best composer for drums, it's in that style that he played and not bridging all styles. And so what we're trying to do with this podcast is hopefully get more discussion about music in general, to be more focused on what you like about it and the things you can learn from it, rather than saying, well, I don't like that because it's not my kind of music, or well, this person is better than this person. Right. It's like, music isn't a competition. Music is an art form that is an expression of human soul, because, you know, everybody is completely different. And to try to just say that, well, you aren't good because your way of expressing yourself doesn't conform to my idea of what self-expression should be. I think it's really dangerous, and I think it's really damaging to art in general, but especially music. And so, I mean, the whole point of this podcast is to be able to create a healthy discussion in the Rush community about these songs, and be able to have us all contributing to the perspective that we all have, and realizing that there isn't going to be one singular perspective that Rush fans will have, but that it's by hearing as many perspectives as possible that can deepen our appreciation for this band.
Well, then, with that, let us discuss something I wanted to bring up. I guess we'll just start with YYZ because we talked about that first. But what am I trying to say? The intro obviously is really cool with the Morse code, but what I also love about it is that it's a tritone. I love tritones. I wrote a paper in college about tritones. Because, yeah, reminder to, if we have any new listeners, I have a degree in music, and so in one of my lit classes, we had to write a paper. I don't remember what the prompt was. I have no idea what the prompt was. It's a long time ago. But I decided to write about tritones, and so I already really liked the interval, which that sounds so nerdy. But then I got to dig deeper, and I dig on them. And so I guess I should explain what it is.
Yeah,
but
probably for. I think at one point in an earlier one we brought up
maybe
tritones,
we brought
but
it up.
definitely we can always
So
re-bring it up.
the interval is meaning like the space between the two notes. So that the beginning of YYZ, after the little intro with the cymbal, then goes what the guitar is doing, well, on the bass. That space between those notes is called a tritone. It's an augmented interval, which means it's larger than like a normal. Like I sound really smart right now, right? So it's not an interval used very very often. It's used often, but not in like, I don't know, normal melodies. It's more harsh sounding. They used to call it the devil's interval.
Yeah. Well,
in the ancient times.
What's also interesting about the tritone and why it isn't used as much is because it's not a stable interval.
Yeah. People, it's dissonant, and people don't like dissonance.
But the interesting thing too is it can be a harsh sound, but then it can also be a very beautiful sound, because if you think of like West Side Story, Maria.
Oh yeah.
It just the way that it's used has a very lyrical kind of endearing tone, or like the Simpsons theme is also starts off with the
that's
tritone.
because the tritone in those instances resolves, which is what's so cool about the beginning of YYZ is that it's just this, I'm going to call it sticky, this like sticky, in your face, doesn't resolve interval that just repeats, and it's like this, I don't know, like almost a drone feel, but it's a tritone. Like it just sounds so cool with the rhythm of the Morse code, and so that's something that I always enjoy.
Yeah, well, because I think that's the most important part about what makes a tritone cool is that it's really dependent on its surroundings for what it's going to be like. Because in those examples that I brought up, like you said, it's the resolution that turns it into a beautiful interval. But if it was just that interval happening like it does in YYZ, it becomes that grating, harsh sound, because there's no context for you to put it in.
Yeah, then they go into like this minor, like, what are they doing? Like, where is this going? And then they like go into the main theme, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But so they're doing this tritone, and then they go into like this elaborate minor sounding run. But what also I love about it is how they're in unison, which unison meaning they're all saying the exact same notes in the exact same rhythm together as an ensemble, which is not easy to do. It's just difficult passage.
And yeah, this passage is extremely difficult to play correctly on bass and guitar because
And then, so you have to nail the run, but they had to nail it together at the exact same time.
I mean, think about it too, because I'll get back to my train of thought, but so it does the tritones do 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 do. Then there's the break, which is always terrifying.
Yes.
And then they come in together.
Come in at the same time. See, this is the thing. I've talked about this in the past in different episodes that you can be the best person in the universe at your instrument. You can be the most technical player. You can play anything that puts in front of you, that is put in front of you. But if you can't play with other people in an ensemble, you're not a good musician. You just aren't. You have to be able to play collaboratively and together. And like, they just like are one person in this track.
And so then back to my point about the main riff. What makes it so difficult is it has, and this is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult things about music in general, is there's an overall melody that you're playing. So the simplified melody that they're doing is do 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 do. But what makes it difficult is there's a ton of repeated notes in there, and so without it in front of me, I'm not going to be able to do it properly. But it's like do 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 do.
Well, it's like double. It's like,
but it's like there's a lot of extra notes in there, and so if you're hitting every note just equal velocity, you're losing all the shape to that melody. And so you have the overarching melody. It's almost like if you're looking at a picture that's not quite in focus, you get the general idea. But then when you get in closer and you see all the stuff that's happening, and so to be able to play it properly, one, it's really fast. It's really difficult to articulate it well. But then you have to be sure that your phrasing, which is just the way that you shape the notes that you're playing to make it seem like a cohesive thought. The way you have to shape it, you have to be very particular about the dynamics of it. And it's a really hard thing to get right, because if you're just playing everything just straight out, yeah, you can hit all the notes, but it's not going to sound good. It's not going to sound interesting. And that's what makes it so hard. And so many people, when they're doing covers, they will simplify it, or they'll, even without realizing it, they'll be playing it wrong, just because it's so difficult.
Which, no shade to them.
Yeah,
they're playing it at the capacity they can play it, but that just shows again how impressive it is.
But I mean, Les Claypool, the bassist for Primus, because Geddy was going to, I believe he was going to talk to him for the Big Book of Bass, I believe it was.
Big Beautiful Book of Bass.
Yes, the Big Beautiful Book of Bass. And I believe Les Claypool was like, yes, on one condition, you teach me how to play YYZ properly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember that.
And after that, Les Claypool was like, yeah, I've been playing it wrong all these years. And so if someone at the caliber of Les Claypool is playing it wrong.
Oh my gosh. It's their secret setup. I'm just kidding.
No, but it's just, so that's one of the things I think that, like, even as someone who a lot of times has an attitude towards YYZ of like, oh, it's just YYZ. I listen to it all. I know it inside and out, backwards and forwards. I've heard it so many times, so I don't really need to listen to it again.
It's in Guitar Hero, Adam. Did you know that? I played it in Guitar Hero. You know what? I actually remember that. While we were sitting there later a little bit, I was like, oh yeah. I remember this conversation. I'm a different person now, okay? And so are you.
That's very true. But no, when you really start digging into what's going on in YYZ, you're like, okay, there is a reason why it is looked on as being like a huge achievement to play it on whatever instrument you're playing.
Yeah.
There's just so much that can get lost in it, and this is one thing that we didn't have time to show, but that I talk about in the full conversation with Steve, is the first time that I saw. So there was a music video for YYZ that came out ages ago, but it's just a CGI drummer playing, and I mean it's doing exactly what Neil does in it.
Is
but
it CGI Neil?
I believe so. Yeah, I think.
Oh, it's interesting. I haven't seen.
I mean, the CGI is not spectacular.
Oh yeah,
because it's fairly old. But I just remember seeing it and like watching what the drummer is doing, and I'm like, it doesn't look complicated. What, like, people say that this is such a great drum track. What's so great about it? It's not very complicated. But that was me not really knowing anything about the drums. But now, still not knowing a ton, but knowing more than I did then. Just seeing it now and listening to it now is like, what makes it difficult isn't that it's a complicated pattern and it's not something that is just so out of reach of everybody. It's that it's shifting from being a simple pattern to being a more complicated pattern, but also supporting what's going on contextually perfectly. And just, if you aren't precise, it's going to sound absolutely horrible. And just the fact that he's able to be so precise with his playing, hit those crazy fills perfectly.
Really cool fills.
And it's just so clean. And that's what makes it impressive. Because sometimes what makes art impressive is not that it's complex and not that it's using these extended techniques that take
simple.
years to develop. It's just that it's simplicity done perfectly.
Totally feel that. Yeah, like definitely could keep going on and on about YYZ. We should probably switch to Leave That Thing Alone.
I will say the last thing about YYZ for now, just that I think kind of bridges the gap to Leave That Thing Alone. I think YYZ has such a great solo by Alex. Because they said that they wanted to go for the feel of being in an airport and just kind of getting that whole, when you're in an international airport and everybody's coming from all these different places, you just have you get this feeling that you're part of a larger world and you're getting those little tastes of it. And that's what you kind of get in the middle and the solo section of YYZ. You get these different cultural flares,
really
and then Alex's guitar solo is just so different from the rest of the song, and it's just got this soaring quality, and that is on even more of display in Leave That Thing Alone. You get this super cool bass intro, and man, I love that bass line. It's so fun to attempt to play.
You're talking about Leave That Thing Alone.
Yeah, Leave That Thing Alone. Yeah. And then when it gets into the, like Steve said, the Doctor Who part, where it's just
I never thought about it that way until he said it, and I was like, oh yeah, it totally sounds like the Doctor Who theme.
But it's just got this soaring quality that just is so endearing, and it just lifts you up. And I love that element to Alex's playing, just that freeness that he gets with it. And so I think that's a huge contributor to Leave That Thing Alone. Because I just love that part when he's soloing, like when he's actually doing the guitar solo in that song, and you just have the bass chugging along in there supporting, and then as it's getting ready to transition back to the do 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 right after the solo, it's almost like you hear the bass being like, okay, if you're ready, I'm gonna ramp back in.
it's like anticipating
Yeah.
what's
It's-
next.
It's kind of like it's kind of like a monster tiptoeing back and like, I'm going to take over again. But,
Not sure why when you were doing that, or my like the image was our 2-year-old like marching around. he's a tank. Well, he's not 2.
not quite.
He's
two yet,
almost
but-
2. He acts 2. Anyway, Leave That Thing Alone reminds me of 2019. Was it 20? In 2019, Adam and I decided to take an acting class
Oh, yeah.
at the local community college for funsies.
Yeah, because
So
I
this
had
was just
taken
a
that
few years
acting
ago.
class
Years ago.
years before we did that.
Like-
And the teacher,
She remembered you.
yeah, she's like, why are you doing this again?
No. So yeah, we decided to take an acting class just because why not? And it was enriching and it taught us a lot and was it was a good experience. But anyway, so one of the projects was having to, what was it even called?
It was the
We had to
3 knocks.
So
Which
yeah, it was like a scene where we couldn't speak, but we had to like portray what was happening in the scene.
So in acting circles, I'm sure any of you actors out there will know what this
the 3 knocks.
what this is. It's just the 3 knocks. It's a list of actions that you have to do.
that you have to do in this.
There's no order that you have to do them in, but it's stuff. It's like knock 3 times, say hello, spin in a circle, crawl,
Whatever they all
and
are.
so it's like just these rudimentary things. And the goal is to come up with a scene that incorporates all these elements, and
With
go at
whatever
it,
you
be
wanna
as
do.
creative as possible. And so, some people do the bare minimum. They just go through in order, and it's like, okay, you did it. But then,
Yeah.
and then other people just create like moments that you're just captivated in, and that's what's super cool about the project.
Yeah, it was a fun project. So Adam chose as his backing track to his 3 knock scene, Leave That Thing Alone. And I guess you were supposed to be like a robber or something.
That was a really fun project, actually.
You were like walking into the house.
So the concept was I was a thief and I was checking this house and no one was there. And so I'm putting in my music, I'm putting in my headphones, and then I hit play, and then Leave That Thing goes on, and then I start going and start robbing the place. And then because obviously I'm an audio engineer and a sound designer, so I made the whole scene and everything.
You basically
so the transition
on everyone.
was
That
so then
project.
the music, because I take out one side of my earbuds because there's something happening, and so there's like a transition where the song fades out, and then there's like an explosion going on in the background, and then the house gets hit, and so then all of a sudden I start off as being this thief who's taking stuff, but now I become trapped in the house, and my only option is to jump out of the 2nd story window.
It was very
at the very end. And so
intense.
it was
The whole class was just kind of stunned after that. But so yeah, there's this intense scene with that he chose probably to them obscure Rush song that they've never heard, but it oddly worked really well with that scene. So I mean, all I ever think about when I listen to Leave That Thing Alone is you doing your acting scene. But then how it was such a cool choice. You could have chosen a lot of different things. It was a really cool choice for that project.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really cool moments in that song, and that song also created the right environment that you were going for in the scene.
Yeah, because I didn't just I didn't build the scene thinking, oh, I'm going to use this song because it's Rush.
Yeah, totally.
But it really did fit the mood that I was going for, and
Peter Roberts.
yeah, because it's got that bopping quality, but it's also kind of got that mysterious
Yeah, like that
feel.
low bass thing.
And it's just like, I think it's the more versatile of the two instrumentals that we're talking about today. Because YYZ is a spectacle unto itself. It's like it demands you to pay attention to it for its
Definitely the
entirety.
spotlight.
Leave That Thing Alone. It's not that it doesn't demand to be paid attention to,
It's more
but
nuanced.
it's so exactly nuanced, I think is the perfect word for it, because it's deceptive in the way that in the ways that it pulls you in, because it has this really cool just repeating guitar part, which just lays the feel, and then the bass just comes in like a rock.
Yeah, it's such a cool bass part. It's, you know what's interesting again is like we've been talking about some of the instrumentals. Well, I mean, like last week with my brain turned off and I almost said I think I'm going bald. That's not even an instrumental. What is it?
Where's My Thing?
Yes. Oh my gosh. And Where's My Thing, where it sounds improvisational, that kind of thing. And or like a jam session type thing. So like that's how I feel the vibe is with Leave That Thing Alone, where it doesn't sound haphazard or anything, but it does sound more like they had a jam sesh and these are what the riffs they came up with and they put it together, and this is this really sweet song that they built.
Yeah.
Whereas YYZ, to what I think about it and how I see it, is very meticulously composed
Yeah.
and specific and like planned to a T,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. Not saying one is better than the other.
Yeah.
Just the differences in that of Leave That Thing Alone feeling more of like a relaxed kind of thing, whereas YYZ is like, metronomic. Not metronomic, but like different.
Yeah, it's like there's a definite feeling of rigidness, not in a bad way, not like they're too stiff, but just that like there's such care taken to compose it that then they're rigidly adhering to the composition, which is important for something like that.
Well, that's what I like about it too.
Yeah, the structure is what makes it work, because there's so much going on, and it's also really cool just with the sounds that Neil used, like in the glass crashing sound,
Yes,
which is something that he built, that he knocked over to get that specific sound.
I do really like the man-made sounds that are, I guess they're all man-made, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like the extra sounds.
Well, because that's the difference too, is YYZ, like if you're, I don't know, to bring it into like almost like a filmmaking context, it'd be like the difference between practical effects and CGI.
I guess
because YYZ is all practical effects as far as the drums are concerned. It's all, it's all the regular acoustic drums. It's got any special sounds were made by him constructing something. And then Leave That Thing Alone.
I guess there was
the drum triggers,
like the synth,
and so then the other sounds that were made, however they were made, they were then triggered by a MIDI controller
really cool.
that he hit. But yeah, and I think that's another thing too, is you can have the debate, well, is practical effects better than CGI? It depends.
No.
Because there are some movies that use practical effects extremely poorly, and other movies that do the same with CGI. But then both styles, if done well, are contributing to the story.
Right.
And so both of these approaches in music, if done well, contribute to the music. So
I don't know what I'm choosing though. After all of this, there's just so many great moments in all of them. I mean, in both of them. And it's like so hard. It's like I don't know where that was going. Never mind.
I mean, I'm definitely with you on that because so when I first made the pairing, and even up to this last moment, and with the Adam Jones saying that he prefers to listen to Leave That Thing Alone,
Yeah.
and Steve, he picked Leave That Thing Alone if he had to pick between
Right.
the two, and so I thought, yeah, of course I'm going to pick Leave That Thing Alone because I have much more of a connection with it because it is more obscure and this like it's not the mainstream thing. But then I have to look inward and be like, well, is it appropriate to choose something just because it's not the mainstream and because you have like this other baggage with this?
Yeah, we've had this conversation in the past when we
Yeah.
did. What was it? Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, when Tom Sawyer
versus.
um,
no,
it was Tom Sawyer versus.
Should I just?
I don't know. Just you might have to look it up. It's
I'll
been a
just look
long
it
time
up.
since we've done that.
That was last year.
Yeah, it's but yeah, during that conversation, we had to really look past what our preconceptions were about it.
Hope it's loading. Stop it. It's still loading. Pause. Oh yeah, Closer to the Heart versus Tom Sawyer.
Oh, that's right.
That was tough.
Yeah, because that was another example of like I went into that thinking, oh, I'm gonna be so sure that it's gonna be Closer to the Heart.
Same, because it's Tom Sawyer. Like,
Yeah.
I appreciated that drummer. Steve. Yeah, I was like drummer TV.
Yeah.
Steve was like, yeah, it's just Tom Sawyer. I was like, yeah, that's what we said in our Tom Sawyer episode, however long ago. Of like, oh yeah, if I was gonna listen to something, I wouldn't choose Tom Sawyer. But then we couldn't deny that it was just such a stinking cool song.
Yeah.
Still, because like that's where I'm at here. Is like, okay, I do really like Leave That Thing Alone. It's one of my favorite tracks on that album, on Counterparts. However, going into it, I do think I want to choose YYZ, not because of the, like I said before when we had this whole conversation previously 10 minutes ago, but it's not because it's the popular one, but that I legitimately just love every single moment of what is going on in that track, and again the tritones and like the fills and that ending, the da-da-da-da, like just how it ends so epically. Like my choice is YYZ. I didn't think it would be that cut and dry for me, but
I mean, the thing that I think about with Leave That Thing Alone is the progression that the band had made at that point and with that album.
It is true. I didn't think about that.
And I think
but
because I think I'm leaning more towards Leave That Thing Alone because I think Counterparts and the sound that they achieved on that album is such a perfect blending of their 80s sensibilities that they developed. And then the transition back to the power trio where they're focusing on the core sound being drums, guitar, and bass. But they brought in the synth stuff that they learned from the 80s and were able to use that as a cool texture.
It's like a sprinkle.
And and like you said, the style of playing feels more free, and yet there is a really smart element of composition in that track. And then Geddy has also said at one time that he feels that that's the best instrumental that they've recorded.
That's really cool, yeah.
Because they just felt like they were on their game, and that it was like a jam session.
Yeah, you definitely feel that. We feel them vibing.
Yeah.
Is that a word?
I mean, we don't have enough time to go into the what is a word debate,
go
but
on. Don't get Adam started on certain things. He'll just keep going. Anyway.
But anyway, yeah, it is a very
Well,
interesting
we both
discussion
chose
for
something
that.
different.
But so I still think that Leave That Thing Alone edges out YYZ to me because I love the sound of controlled spontaneity in it and showing that yes, they had reached their pinnacle in moving pictures as far as like where they had been and where they came. And I think counterpoints I think Counterparts is another pinnacle for them as far as like from moving pictures. Because think about it, right after moving pictures, you had Signals, which was a huge turnoff for a lot of people, and that was
Which is ridiculous.
crazy. But Signals through Hold Your Fire is where that really rich synth sound was developed. And then they started trying to transition with Presto and Roll the Bones. And then Counterparts is where, boom, new sound.
Rush.
Where we've incorporated all of these things. And I think that was another arrival point with the discipline that they developed, but then mixed with the ability to just let themselves have jam sessions and be more spontaneous, which not that was completely lacking in previous albums, but I think that instrumental track to me highlights the fact that they had matured as musicians to be able to let loose and not have to be as completely rigid in their compositions.
That doesn't make this any easier.
But so that I'm just explaining why I think Leave That Thing Alone is what I would pick out of the two.
Yeah.
Not because of it's more deserving from like a musical standpoint because it's had more impact on the trajectory of their music.
Right.
Because I think YYZ still holds that, like, it is, I think it's more difficult to play. YYZ is. I think it's got a lot more weight that it's carrying as far as the Rush discography and their catalog. But I think, to me, Leave That Thing Alone has a cooler story as far as the story it tells about the band. And I'm more drawn to that aspect of it because there's so many other things about these two that I just can't decide on.
You have to give up the tritones, Adam. There's no tritones and Leave That Thing Alone. Well, maybe I haven't really. I don't think there is any.
not on prominent display.
Yeah, I'm just teasing you anyways. That's not. I'm not actually making that point, but
that's just my subjective take on what in this moment is drawing me more towards Leave That Thing Alone.
Very fair. I'm just like staring into space because I don't know what to do from this point. I mean, it's not the first time we've both been very like, yes, this is the one I choose, and they're not the same one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, okay. To be completely brutally honest with our audience.
Yeah.
If I'm shuffling all of Rush and listen to it on my phone or whatever, I always skip YYZ. Like, I like YYZ, but I'm always, well, it's not because I don't like it. It's because I'm like, I'm not committed to give it the attention it deserves right now. It's kind of like when I skip 2112 or Cygnus, not because they're not awesome, but it's like, they deserve more of my attention right now.
Yeah.
And I want to passively listen. And so I'm not saying like, oh, leave that thing alone. It's just, easy to put on the background. It's not as cool then.
Mhm.
But like overall, I don't ever skip leave that thing alone.
Yeah.
I always.
I think you're actually highlighting another reason why I'm drawn to Leave That Thing Alone is because there's just such an immense listenability to it
Yeah.
while still also having the really difficult things to play it properly, because we didn't dive as deep into that aspect of it, but there are difficult things about that, like
Absolutely.
learning the bass line, the articulations you have to have on there to make it sound good and not just like a wall of notes. It also is very demanding. And
sorry, go on.
because there's like a section where it's like the do 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 do,
Right, like that's difficult.
like, and there's like these, it's almost like, if you put it in linguistic terms, it's like if you're writing a paragraph and you have a sentence that without punctuation would be very confusing, but with the wrong punctuation just makes it seem like it's just very rudimentary, elementary, just like kind of like, well, you tried to put something in there. But if you craft it right, you're pulling your readers in and having them enjoy what could potentially be a very run-on sentence. And
your brain lurks so different than mine. I appreciate your perspective so much because I would have never even considered that analogy, but it makes sense. I just wouldn't have gotten that out of my own brain.
And so there are parts in that song that seem like they have the potential in the wrong hands to be run-on sentences that are just a slog to get through. But the way that they've pulled off the articulation and the punctuation, it makes it extremely listenable and extremely just able to be in the background and just like vibing to it. But then when you actively listen to it, you still have all of the cool things that YYZ gives to you as well.
Well, and Leave That Thing Alone gets stuck in my head. YYZ doesn't get stuck in my head as easily. It's more of like an abstract painting.
Yeah.
But the Leave That Thing Alone melody, well, main theme, I suppose. That guitar will always be stuck in my head. And so I really did want to choose YYZ. Like, I do love that track, but I think I am going to choose Leave That Thing Alone for the purposes of this exercise.
Yeah.
I think I will choose Leave That Thing Alone as well, which, yeah, that was a tough decision.
Yeah, it's definitely tough because I did have a time period where I was just obsessed with YYZ. Like this is a track that when I first heard it, I was very confused as to why people liked it so much.
YYZ?
YYZ.
Oh, okay.
Like, it wasn't instantly accessible to me. But this was also the time when in my life I thought that I was a music connoisseur, and I thought that I, because I listened to a lot more classical music, and and I played the piano, and I was playing these hard romantic era piano.
It's like
things.
teenage.
Yeah.
Okay, when you're okay.
This is when I was living in Austin.
Oh, okay.
And so probably like 13, 14 years old.
Oh, young teenager.
Well, no, I would have been 14, 15 years old.
Well, that's still young.
Yeah, but yeah, still young.
Anyway.
But YYZ was one of the first times that I actually needed to actively listen and dig deep because I wanted to like the song. And I could recognize that there was a lot of merit to that music, and there was a lot of stuff that I didn't understand about it, which, thinking about it now is like, well, it's not that complicated. Like, it's really easy to get into.
Well,
But at that
now,
time,
versus
that's not the
30
kind of music I was immersed in.
Yeah.
And so it was like a foreign language to me to really pick it apart, because in the instrumental realm, because with lyrics, that's one thing, because that's in a different part of my brain. But as far as instrumental music, I was surrounded by just conventional, classical conventions. The edgiest I got in instrumental music was like Franz Liszt. And so to then have YYZ kind of be one of the key tracks in my life to break me out of that mold and to kind of help me get on a path where I was more exploratory with music than I had been before. I was obsessed with that song, and I tried to learn it on guitar and bass. But so even with all that, baggage, if you will, or just all of that meaning to me, and that, that key memory that I have with it, I think even with all of that, it opened the door to let me appreciate Leave That Thing Alone from the get-go and understand the difficulties of it. And so it's like YYZ was a stepping stone in me appreciating Leave That Thing Alone more, and to the point where now I have to pick Leave That Thing Alone just because, of all the things that I said before, not to rehash all of that again. But so yeah, even though YYZ has such a huge part of my life and I love that track, at the end of the day, I still 95% of the time I'm gonna throw on Leave That Thing Alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm the same in that respect, and that was a hard decision, but I think we've hashed it out quite a bit to be able to come to our conclusion that this week's winner is Leave That Thing Alone.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think. That's a hard one.
Yeah.
I'm just glad you didn't put YYZ with La Villa.
Yes. Which that is next week's.
Yeah, which the
it's
pairing is
the last pairing of this bracket, which is La Villa Strangiato and the Main Monkey Business, which we'll get into why I put those together next week. And for our next interview, we have Doug Helvering, a composer who's on YouTube, and he's going to break down some of these composing terms that we've used in the past on this show. And then super great interview. You guys are going to love it. But to really break down La Villa Strangiato and Main Monkey Business, we have Doug on. We have Jim on to talk about the drums, and he breaks it down very, very well. And then we have the guitarists on again as well. So we've got a jam-packed
week for you next week.
Yeah. So be on the lookout for those. And until next time, I don't have a witty thing to end on that'll make Julianne scream.
And what?
That won't make you squirm this time.
I thought you said scream. I'm like, well, I'm not going to scream. All right. See you guys.